Welcome to today's Explainer. Today we're going to objectively break down the hard data behind America's absolute, unmatched military dominance in 2025. Look, when we talk about global defense, the United States isn't just strong. According to the numbers, it sits in a tier completely of its own. But how exactly does it maintain that edge? And maybe more importantly, can anyone actually catch up? Let's find out.
Take a look at this number, 0.0744. That is the Global Firepower Index score for the United States, putting it squarely at number 1 in the world. Now, right on its heels are Russia and China, both trailing slightly at 0.0788. Now, on paper, that gap might sound totally minuscule, right? Almost like a rounding error. But in military terms, that tiny decimal difference translates to a massive, real-world chasm in capabilities. When you're talking about raw firepower, global reach, funding, and speed, that little gap represents an absolute powerhouse of a lead.
To make sense of all this overwhelming global data, we're going to break this explainer down into 6 core areas: the price of power, the human element, dominating the ground, aerial supremacy, controlling the seas, and finally, the future of defense.
Section 1. The price of power, funding global dominance.
Okay, let's dive into this. Because before you can put a single tank on the battlefield or a jet in the sky, you need a massive financial engine. In 2025, the U.S. is expected to spend just under $900 billion on its military. That's over 3% of its entire gross domestic product. To put that scale into perspective, that single budget is actually larger than the entire GDP of Switzerland. Compare that to the officially reported budgets of China at $249 billion and Russia at $126 billion. Even if you combined and literally doubled the budgets of both of those near-peer competitors, they still wouldn't reach the U.S. total. In fact, if you added up the defense budgets of the next 9 countries combined, and we're talking heavy hitters like China, Russia, India, the UK, Japan, and France, it still would not match what the US spends. This money is the crucial enabler for getting that cutting-edge technology and unparalleled global reach.
Moving right along to Section 2. The human element, quality versus quantity in manpower.
So there's a very specific strategic choice being made here when it comes to manpower. If we just look at raw availability, essentially who could be mobilized in a massive global war, China and India absolutely dominate with their huge populations. They both have larger active duty forces too, at 2 million and 1.4 million respectively, compared to the US at 1.3 million. And if we look at reserves, countries like Vietnam have an astonishing 5 million reservists ready to be called up. But the US operates on a fundamentally different philosophy. Instead of relying on enormous pools of conscripts or reservists, the U.S. strategy focuses heavily on paying full-time salaries for a highly trained, fully engaged active duty force that is ready to enter battle immediately.
The sheer rigor of this preparation is unparalleled, and it brings us to a huge recurring theme for this explainer: quality over quantity. Even a small number of America's elite squads, like the Navy SEALs or the Green Berets, are exceptionally deadly compared to huge, standard battalions from other nations. It's the infrastructure, the rigorous training, and the unmatched equipment that makes these individuals so devastatingly effective on the ground.
Section 3. Dominating the ground, tanks and armored vehicles.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the strategy behind the hardware itself. The U.S. Army is the largest branch, with over 950,000 personnel. But on paper, China and Russia actually have more tanks. But the U.S. relies on the M1 Abrams. This thing is a 73-ton defensive powerhouse with near-impenetrable armor, a massive 120mm smoothbore cannon, and decades of continuous modern upgrades. When you compare that to its competitors, it's night and day. Russia heavily relies on the older T-72 model, which lags far behind, and their much newer T-14 is incredibly scarce. China's Type 99 is definitely lighter and faster, but overall, the sheer defensive and offensive quality of the Abrams proves that high-end engineering totally beats raw numbers like China's 6,800 or Russia's 5,750 total tanks.
But wait, in the areas where the U.S. does decide to prioritize raw numbers, the scale is just staggering. Over 390,000 armored vehicles. This completely dwarfs the runner-up India, sitting at just under 150,000, and China at a little over 144,000. And this U.S. fleet includes everything from basic transport and reconnaissance vehicles to the heavily armed Bradley fighting vehicles. The Bradleys alone are packed with 25mm chain guns and TOW missile launchers that can literally take out enemy tanks from 13,000 feet away. The sheer volume and variety of high-quality armor here is just completely unmatched.
Up next, Section 4. Undisputed aerial supremacy, the unmatched Air Force.
When we look to the skies, the gap gets even wider. The United States possesses over 13,000 total military aircraft. Let that sink in. That is literally more than the aircraft fleets of China and Russia put together. And behind all these machines is a deeply dedicated air force of nearly 500,000 personnel, ensuring that the skies remain firmly under American control.
And this immense volume builds into an overwhelming tactical advantage. Because, these aircraft aren't just numerous, their specs are absolutely jaw-dropping. You've got B-2 Spirits, which are billion-dollar stealth bombers capable of dropping nuclear payloads or punching through hundreds of feet of Earth with bunker busters. Then you have the fighters. The F-22 Raptor hits Mach 2 speeds with a 50,000-foot ceiling, and the F-35 Lightning II provides superior stealth alongside devastating firepower. These fleets completely outclass rival planes out there like the Chinese J-20 Mighty Dragon or the Russian Su-57. And when you add in this incredible support network of 600 tankers for mid-air refueling and over 5,800 helicopters, including more than 1,000 attack helicopters, the aerial dominance is simply staggering.
Which brings us to Section 5, Controlling the Seas, Naval Power, and Global Reach.
And this brilliantly illustrates what it takes to actually project power on a global scale. True global reach requires mastering the oceans, and honestly, nothing projects power quite like an aircraft carrier. The United States has 11 of them. China has 3. Russia has exactly 1. These massive carriers are essentially floating military bases. They uniquely enable the U.S. to transport jets, helicopters, and thousands of personnel across huge oceans to execute long-range operations anywhere on the globe. Now, China has invested massively and actually has a higher number of total naval vessels overall, but they simply do not possess this level of expeditionary, long-range carrier capability. Beyond those main carriers, the U.S. maintains a really sharp edge in major offensive and supportive naval vessels too. The U.S. operates 9 helicopter carriers, compared to China's 4 and Russia's 0. Looking at destroyers, which are vessels specifically designed to wreak havoc on enemy ships, aircraft, and ground targets, the U.S. has 81, while China has 50 and Russia has 10. And beneath the surface, it's a similar story. The U.S. operates 70 submarines, keeping a tight lead over Russia's 63 and China's 61.
Let's shift gears for Section 6, Areas of Improvement, where the U.S. actually falls short.
Because yes, there are actually specific categories where raw numbers heavily favor the competition. As you can see, the U.S. lacks in artillery numbers, lagging way behind Russia in both self-propelled and towed artillery. And frigates, smaller naval vessels, the U.S. currently has 0 compared to China's 50. So why the gap? Well, it's largely because the U.S. military is built from the ground up for distant global power projection via carriers and air superiority rather than regional coastal defense or grinding, localized artillery wars.
Finally, Section 7, The Future of Defense, Maintaining the #1 spot.
The big takeaway here is that the U.S. military is definitely not standing still. To address those few naval vulnerabilities we just talked about, there are already major plans underway for the construction of new frigates and corvettes to counter those growing Eastern navies. On land, the U.S. is aggressively developing next-generation hardware, like the Abrams X tank, which is designed to be lighter, faster, and way more efficient than any previous model. When you combine these forward-looking hardware investments with the world's greatest military intelligence and that sustained, incredibly high defense budget, it becomes pretty clear that the U.S. is actively maneuvering to ensure it keeps its decisive lead intact for years to come. Which leaves us with one final, incredibly fascinating question to ponder. Given the absolute trillions in spending, the hyper-focus on unmatched quality and rigorous training, and the sheer global reach of this force, can anyone actually overtake the U.S. military in the years to come? It is one massive mountain to climb for any competitor, for sure. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep analyzing the data, stay curious, and I'll catch you next time.